there's an incredible message there. And it doesn't really disassociate itself with what we've been studying in the book of Acts, because all through the book of Acts, you've seen that the early church, they were continually placed in fires. Not actual fires, but metaphorical fires. And in difficult situations. We've already seen in the book of Acts where Stephen was stoned, and we see the church being persecuted, and we know, James had already been killed, and, last week we saw Paul and Silas in prison. And I want to tell you something, and this is not a message that you hear in Christianity a whole lot today, because it's just it's not a real like happy feel good kind of thing what I'm about to say. But I'll just tell you this: if you follow Christ for any amount of time, you're gonna get thrown in a fire. You are going to go through hell. You are. The Bible proves it. Our life experience proves it. It's going to happen. There's a lot of people out there today preaching this message that, you follow Christ and everything's just perfect. Well, that's just not true. Okay? Everything ends up perfect, but the way to perfection has a lot of pain on the way. But there is the possibility of another being in the fire with you. I want to tell you, just to kind of lighten the mood a little bit before we jump in, because this is a great story that we're going to look at. Open your Bibles to Daniel chapter 3. I've had a couple of skin cancers, and most of them have been, not the bad kind. One was the melanoma type, and nothing's, come of it. It's been fine. Tamara has had to deal with a melanoma, and but Friday I had to go to the dermatologist, and I don't know if y'all can tell because I don't have that much hair anyway, but my head is shaved right now, and I've decided to just keep it shaved from now on because I don't have enough hair to really mess with anyway. But the last time I was at the dermatologist 6 months ago, they had to freeze like 20 precancerous places off of my head. And, left unabated, they would probably eventually, left untreated, they would turn into some, hopefully, not deadly form of cancer. But it got to the point, and they used liquid nitrogen to do it. So they're actually freezing it off, but it feels like they're using a can of fire from the pit of hell to burn those things off your head. Anybody ever had it done besides me, Dad, and Tom, Martha? It hurts. So they told me 6 months ago, they said, listen, when you come back, you're having so many of these spots, we need to consider doing a chemical peel. And I thought, oh, that's great. Because I'd heard ladies talk about having a chemical peel done on their face. So I thought I was going to like a spa day. Said you're going to have a chemical peel. Somehow I had confused like a mud facial with a chemical peel. I thought they were going to rub some mud on my head and let it dry and pull it off. And I honestly thought that's what it's going to be. Well, so I go in and, they check me all over and make sure I don't have any bad places or anything. And then the doctor, she said, well, do you think you're up for the chemical peel? And her language just kind of bothered me. Do you think you're up for it? Because I thought I was having a spa day. And I thought, well, that's like asking, do you think you can stand having your feet rubbed? And so I said, well, yeah, I guess I'm up to it. I mean, how bad can it be? And she said, well, and always remember this. If a doctor tells you it's going to be uncomfortable, that translates into it's going to hurt so bad you can't stand it. Okay? If a doctor tells you it might swell a little, it's going to swell up like a balloon. Okay? Well, she told me, she said, well, most people find it a little bit uncomfortable, but said, it doesn't last long. And I said, well, okay. And I said, yeah, okay, all right. So I figured out, well, it's not going to be a mud bath or anything. So the next thing that happens is while she's getting the chemicals ready, this assistant gets a battery-operated portable fan out. She pulls this out. And I'm thinking, oh, my heck, what is that for? Well, I found out in a few minutes. That was to put the fire out. But so I'm sitting there, and she said, okay, are you ready? And I'm like, you said it was only going to be mildly uncomfortable, and now you're asking me, do I want a bullet to bite on or something? And so the first thing she did was, like, I smelled this smell, and I could recognize the smell, but I couldn't immediately place it where it was. But then I said, what are you doing? She said, well, I'm going to scrub your head with acetone. And I've forgotten what acetone was, but you ladies know what acetone is. It's fingernail polish remover, or toenail or whatever. Well, so I thought, you're going to scrub my head with something that removes paint. Okay, well, that upset me to begin with, Jazz. I thought, okay. And it smelled like one of the nail salons. And so she started scrubbing my head with acetone. That was okay. It was kind of cool. And then she said, all right, are you ready? And I'm going, you said this wasn't going to be that bad, that it was mildly uncomfortable. And I've heard ladies having it done to their face. Don't. Okay? Just don't. I mean, just whatever you do, don't. Well, she gets out this thing. It looks like an old thing that you polish your shoes with. Guys, if you've ever shined your shoes, look like something you would apply shoe polish with. Well, she dipped it in something, and I couldn't really see what it was, and she began smearing it over my head, and I thought, well, that's not too bad, and I thought that for about 15 seconds. And then after about 15 seconds, my head felt like I was standing upside down in the pit of hell. If hell is the lake of fire, I was at least that deep, okay? I was on fire. It was like, I was kind of trying to fight back the little water. I don't know what you called it. It was trying to run out of the corner of my eyes. Because I thought, well, if a woman can stand this done to her face, I ought to be able to take it being done to my head. Well, she rubbed and rubbed. And then this guy got this fan, and she just started walking around me in circles like this, blowing it on my head and trying to cool my head off. Because I'm telling you, I was on fire. And I thought, how long? I said, how long is this going to last? She said, well, probably not more than about 5 minutes. And it seemed like 5 hours. But the gal with the fan, she's blowing that fan. I said, honey, you're going to need to get a bigger fan and go get a 20-pound bag of ice. I said, because y'all have put a blowtorch to my head. And but anyway, after about 5 minutes, it subsided. And I thought to myself, I said, if I ever have to have another chemical pill, I think I'll just let them put me to sleep and take a scalpel and take off 3 or 4 layers of skin and just, because I don't want to have another chemical pill. So, any of you ladies, if you're tempted to go somewhere and have a chemical pill, you need to, before I leave, you need to look at what it's doing to my head. And so just don't do that. But I was on fire. And it, unfortunately, it went away pretty quickly. But here's the problem with life. We, even as followers of Christ, we get thrown into fiery furnaces sometimes. We get thrown into situations where we say things like, I don't know if I'm going to make it through this. Have you ever said that? We say things like, you know what, this is going to kill me. This is going to be the end of it. Because that's what fiery furnaces feel like. And a message that as a Christian you'll never go through that, that's just wrong. Okay? Whether it's prison, where Paul and Silas were in. Paul was shipwrecked, he was beaten, he was starved, he was, naked, without clothes. I mean, every bad thing that you can imagine pretty much happened to Paul right up until he got his head cut off. But every fiery furnace that Paul went through, there was another in the fire. And that's a possibility for me and you as well. Now, I would say that it's a definite if you are a Christian. But I'm not so sure that's true. Okay? And I'm going to tell you why. Let's look at Daniel chapter 3. All right? I'll give you a little context. And I came in this morning prepared to speak out of Acts chapter 16. So when I walked in and heard the song, I completely changed that. So Paul told Timothy, you need to be ready to preach in season and out. So, I don't ever have any notes, but this is just out of the overflow of my heart and what I know about furnaces. But the Jews had been captured by the Babylonians. Okay? And what King Nebuchadnezzar, who was the king of Babylon, had done is he had removed or deported all the smartest and most capable Jews from Jerusalem and taken them to Babylon. And he basically left all the untalented, people who really weren't capable of anything back in Jerusalem, because they didn't have anybody that could lead them to an uprising or to do anything or to get out of the mess that they were in. So he'd taken every smart person, every capable person, everybody that kind of had something to offer that might could do something. He had taken them to Babylon. Okay? And Daniel was one of the ones that had been taken to Babylon. Okay? And Daniel became very powerful in Babylon, even though he was a Jew, because he could interpret dreams. All right? And that Daniel at one point became, right under King Nebuchadnezzar, even though Daniel was a Jew, he became the ruler practically of all of Babylon, even though he wasn't a Babylonian. All right? But even Daniel, y'all maybe know the story. He even got thrown in a pit with some lions himself. So everything wasn't peaches and cream for Daniel. But Daniel had 3 friends, and you may know their names. Have any of you ever heard of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Right. Okay? Did you know that isn't their names? You may know that. If you know that, maybe because I've told you that. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were their Babylonian names. Okay? Their Jewish names were Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Okay? But for the sake of this passage, we'll call them by their Babylonian names. Okay? But we're going to find out in a few minutes that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they had risen to a level of where they were very, very high-ranking officials in Babylon. As best you could have it in being deported from your land, they had it about as good as you could. Okay? And everything was going pretty well, but then all of a sudden some circumstances changed, and they found themselves thrown into the worst furnace that they could ever be thrown into. So if you're going through any kind of fire, if you feel like your life is in any kind of furnace, maybe you've come out of one, maybe you're in one, maybe you see yourself possibly headed towards one, I just want to encourage you this morning, okay? Because there can be another one in the fire. There can be. Now, had Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah not been the lovers of God and the people that they were, I'm not sure this story would have happened the way it did. All right? Because the Bible talks about in Corinthians how there are people who are going to make it to heaven, but they're going to get there like somebody running out of a burning house who takes nothing with them. Another way to say that is, and next week when we talk about what must I do to be saved, there's probably a lot of people who maybe just barely make it over that bar of being saved, but they're getting into heaven by the skin of their teeth. All right? They've done enough in order for Christ's atoning death to pay the penalty for their sin, but they're just living at the minimum level of being a follower of Christ and a lover of Jesus. Y'all know what I'm talking about? Just kind of living at the minimum level of Christianity. And that's where a lot of Western Christianity is today. We're just living at the minimum level. All right? So we're going to start the story. King Nebuchadnezzar, we're in verse chapter 3. King Nebuchadnezzar made a gold statue 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Okay? So let me tell you, if you want another in the fire, you need to realize what might keep that from happening. Okay? So here's the first thing. There are going to be a lot of things in your life that tempt you to take your eyes off of God. There are going to be a lot of things in life that tempt you to take your eyes off of God. In this case, it was a 90-foot tall, 9 feet wide statue. Now, if you're cruising along in Babylon and you see a 90-foot tall statue and 9 feet wide, what is more than likely going to happen? You're going to look at it, aren't you? Well, in the world that we live in, you can't go 30 seconds without encountering something that tempts you to take your eyes off of Jesus. You go watch television, it does it. You can go anywhere. And I promise you, every 30 seconds, you'll see something that will tempt you to take your eyes off of Jesus. Now, if you do that, I can't guarantee you there'll be another in the fire. But if you don't yield to that temptation, I can guarantee you that you're on your way to there being another in the fire. Okay? So you just got to watch for those temptations and recognize them for what they are, because our culture is rife with temptations to take our eyes off of God. You guys know that, don't you? I mean, there's everything in the world. There's so many things that are tempting us that the devil is using to cause us not to be biblical followers of Jesus. And when I say biblical, I'm talking about Stephen and Paul and Silas and Barnabas and that crowd. That's the correct representation of a biblical follower of Jesus. Someone who says, well, I believe in Jesus, but I'm going to go and act however I want to and think however I want to and feel however I want to and do whatever I want to. And I'm going to get into heaven because of the grace of God. That is not a biblical Christian. Right? Because if you look in the Bible, everyone who ever encountered Jesus and accepted His message and entered into a relationship with Him, they were changed. If they were changed, you can't find a single person in the Bible who became a follower of Jesus Christ whose life wasn't radically changed. And we live in a world in which people call themselves a Christian but act just like every non-Christian that's cruising the planet. And I don't understand that, to be quite honest. And I've done it, but I don't understand it. I don't understand how Jesus, allowing Himself to be hung on a cross and crucified for my sin, could have no effect, no transformational effect, and make a difference in my life. Because you think about it. Jesus died the most horrific death in the history of man. And we say, I accept that atoning death as a sacrifice of my sin. I repent of my sin. I place my faith in Jesus Christ. Yet I live like the world. That is not consistent with the Bible. Being mean is not consistent with the Bible. Being disrespectful is not consistent with the Bible. Harboring hate in your heart is not consistent with the Bible. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control. The fruit of the Spirit is what is consistent with the Bible in the life of a believer. Now, I'm not saying we'll always achieve perfection in that, but that's the truth. Following Christ changes us and makes us different than the world. But there's always going to be temptations out there that cause us to take our eyes off of Jesus. Read on with me. All right? Then Nebuchadnezzar, he sent messages to the high officers, officials, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the provincial officials to come to the dedication of the statue he had set up. So these officials came and stood before the statue King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then a herald shouted, "People of all races and nations and languages, listen to the king's command." Now, here's the king talking. And if you don't obey the king, you can get in fairly serious trouble. It's not like, it was me there telling you this. This was the king of Babylon where you were living, telling you, here's what you better do. When you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, Mauricio, you need to find out what a zither is. You probably know. A lyre, a harp, pipes, and other musical instruments. Whenever you hear the music play, you better dance. That's what it says right here. It doesn't say that in those languages, but it says, when you hear the music, you better bow down to the ground to worship King Nebuchadnezzar's gold statue. All right? So when you hear the music, you better dance. So not only is there going to be things in life that tempt you to take your eyes off of God, but there's going to be lots of encouragement for you to dance when you hear the music. You dig what I'm saying? There's going to be lots of encouragement, not only for you to take your eyes off of God, but for you to live like the world. That's the message. Listen, I love sinners. Because at the core of my being, that's who I am. But I'm no longer a sinner, but I'm a saint, covered by the blood of Jesus Christ. When God looks at me, He doesn't see a sinner, He sees a saint. But I am still wrestling with my flesh that wants to sin as often as it gets the opportunity. Because when I hear the music, sometimes I want to dance. And you realize, I ain't got nothing against dancing. I'm using that as a metaphor. When I hear the music, I want to take my eyes off Jesus and I want to listen to that encouragement. Because people are going to encourage you to do the wrong thing. Y'all realize that, don't you? You may have friends that do it. You may have people in authority over you that do it. You may have people that drive you to do it because of the way they behave and everything. But there's always going to be encouragement out there to do the wrong thing. And the wrong thing here was to dance when you heard the music, to bow down to that golden statue. Now, when you get thrown into a fiery furnace, if you've got your eyes off of God and you're dancing to the music of the world, I can't guarantee you that there's going to be another in the fire with you. But I can guarantee you that if you're not allowing those distractions to distract you, and I can guarantee you that if you're not bowing down to the idols, there will be another one in the fire when you get thrown in the furnace. Because, this is what the story tells us. See, because we get this, we're told as Christians that, and it is true that we're never alone. It is not true that we will never be harmed. There's a difference. And see, another in the fire, if I'm in a furnace, I not only want another in the fire, but I want some relief from the heat. I want some deliverance from the flames. I want out of the furnace. And I would prefer to come out alive rather than drug out in a shovel full of ashes. Because that's what furnaces can do to you. They can kill you. And that's why you need another in there with you. We're going to find out who that other is in just a moment. So at the sound of the instruments, you better bow down and worship. All right? Look at verse 8. But some of the astrologers went to the king and informed on the Jews. They said to the king, Nebuchadnezzar, long live the king. You issued a decree requiring all the people to bow down and worship the gold statue when they hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and other musical instruments. That decree also states that those who refuse to obey must be thrown into a blazing furnace. There are consequences for not dancing when you hear the music. Let me translate this way. It's easier to get along in this fallen world if you will act like the fallen world. See, it's easier to get ahead in this life by cheating. You'll fit in better in this world in sinning rather than in trying to stay faithful to Jesus. Things in this life will be easier if you'll dance when you hear the music. But who is it that you are looking to please? Are you looking to please the king of this world, who is the devil himself? Or are you looking to please the king of the king, king of kings? You got to decide. Because in this world, it's easier if you'll just dance when you hear the music. Somebody says, hey, come on, let's go sing. You say, all right, because that's going to make things easier. You'll be encouraged to do the wrong thing. But if you choose to live in a Christ-like way, not only will people notice it, but some people will point it out and try to use it against you. I promise you that. You just go wherever you travel in circles and start to live like an absolute sold-out, born-again believer of Jesus, a believer in Jesus. People will start noticing it, and some people will try to use it against you. I promise you that. The reason we don't feel any persecution in the Western church is because we're just really not that much different than the rest of the world. Let me tell you what's going on. Mauricio's family just went back this week. They're not able to have church this morning. They cannot have church. Because over the weekend in Chile, there has been rioting. Mauricio, how many train stations were burned?
16.
16 train stations were burned in Santiago. Right? How many buses were
60.
60 public transportation buses were blown up. Right? The military is in the streets cracking down on protesters. What are they protesting? They're protesting the fact that the government has raised taxes on food. On what else, Mauricio?
Fuel.
Food and fuel.
So they raised the prices of the transportation.
So they've raised the prices of transportation and fuel, and people have taken to the streets to protest. And I'm not saying burning bus stations and buses and train stations is the right thing, but they're trying to be countercultural to what's going on that is obviously wrong. Along with this, the senators and the highest government officials in Chile just gave themselves a raise of $2,500 a month. Is that right, Mauricio?
Sorry, how much is?
$2,500 a month.
Yeah.
$2,500 a month in Chile is a boatload of money.
Yes.
It's a boatload of money. It's kind of like the young people who are protesting their freedom in Hong Kong, and they're getting beat to death by the Chinese military. If you begin to stand up for what's right and don't live according to what's wrong, people are going to notice it, and they're going to try to use it against you. We see it happen in the Bible, and you may have experienced it in real life. Somebody's going to tap you, and that's who the astrologers are. They're tattletales. You're trying to do what's right, and you got somebody going and saying, "Oh, okay, listen, this one over here is, she's a teacher and she's talking about Jesus in her classroom and she needs to be fired. She needs to be," you see what I'm saying? Okay? So watch what happens. So this decree also states that those who refuse to obey must be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews. Notice before, there was a bunch of Jews, but now there's 3 Jews in particular. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who you have put in charge of the province of Babylon. They pay no attention to you, your majesty. They refuse to serve your gods and do not worship the gold statue you have set up. You see, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were not distracted by the statue, and their behavior was not changed by encouraged, ergo being ordered to bow down and worship. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stayed faithful to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. In our case, it would be we stay faithful to Christ. So somebody says, "Hey, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they won't bow down to the statue." And you said, even though they're 3 of your favorite Jews, you said that anybody that wouldn't bow down and worship the statue, they had to be thrown in a blazing furnace. So the king probably thinks, well, even though I like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they've been of great help to me, I got to make an example of them, elsewise no one else will listen to what I say. So, then Nebuchadnezzar flew into a rage and ordered that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought before him. When they were brought in, Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you refuse to serve my gods or to worship the gold statue I have set up? I will give you one more chance to bow down and worship the statue I have made when you hear the sound of the musical instruments." I'll give you one more chance to dance when you hear the music. I like you guys. I'm going to give you one more chance. I'm going to tell you what. I have friends back in my late teens and my early 20s, all the way up into my late 20s. And I was the leader of the band when it came to the singing. But God radically changed my life around 1989, 1990. And I refused to lay my eyes on the statue, and I quit dancing when I heard the music. And I had a bunch of friends that I thought would be friends for life, and they dropped me like a hot potato. They dropped me just like that. Because, see, they danced when they heard the music. And I quit. So they didn't have any use for me anymore. They started to actually make fun of me. I tried to stay friends with them. But they started calling me, you're a deacon now. And I'm not a deacon, man. Something's happening. God's just changed my life, and I'm not going to be who I was. You're going to wind up a preacher. Well, I guess they were a little prophetic in that. But I'm telling you, probably the 10 best friends in my life dropped me like I was nothing. Because I would no longer dance when I heard the music. And Nebuchadnezzar and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, I mean, they were Nebuchadnezzar's three main dudes, and Nebuchadnezzar is about to kill them because they won't bow down and worship the idol. He said, I'm going to give you one more chance. I'm going to give you one more chance. He said, I will give you one more chance to bow down and worship the statue I've made when you hear the sound of a musical instrument. But if you refuse, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. And then what God will be able to rescue you from my power? You see, that's what's wrong in the world today, is we feel like the power of the world is greater than the power of God. And in order to make it in the world, we got to dance when we hear the music rather than be faithful to Jesus Christ. Because that's the way our world is set up. You can go further, faster by dancing to the music. You can. When I was in business with my dad, we developed a good reputation. Our company did, because I refused to lie, cheat, or steal, because I was the one that was doing business with all our customers and other companies and everything. And we experienced a lot of success because people came to know that when our company said we would do X, we did X. If we said we can't do X, but we can do Y, our company became, or their company became, very well respected within the industry because we did the right thing. Now, we didn't become rich. And quite honestly, we could have made more money. I could have made the company more money by cheating people. And there was a lot of ways to cheat in our industry. There was. But I wouldn't do that. Because that's not the Christ-like thing to do. So they're threatened here. So Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego have to make a decision, and we all have to make a decision at some point. Okay, what are we going to do? If we're caught on the carpet, what are we going to do? Are we going to dance and bow down to the statue when we hear the music? Or are we going to stay faithful to Jesus Christ when we're told to do the opposite? When we're encouraged to do the opposite? It's a defining moment in your life when you're faced with that decision. You can either do what will get you by in the world, or you can be faithful to Jesus, which might get you killed. It really is that simple. It's that simple. Because what is pleasing to the world is not pleasing to Christ. And there are consequences to both sides of the equation. There are consequences to both choices. But I would far rather suffer the consequences of this world than I had show up in heaven like somebody escaping a fire with absolutely nothing. That passage actually says that, wood, hay, and straw, it's going to burn up. So that's what you're building your life on, just wood, hay, and straw, that's going to burn up. And you're going to escape that kind of house like one escaping through the flames. But if you'll build your house on the cornerstone of Jesus Christ, that's like gold and silver. And that's not burned up by fire, that's refined by fire. But we got to choose. So let's see what they chose. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you. Did you know that when Jesus was on his way to the cross, that people were spitting on him? They were calling him names. When he was walking the Via Dolorosa, which means the way of the cross, people were cursing him. They were spitting on him. They were mocking him. They were they were doing every horrible thing you can imagine. And Peter wrote this about Jesus. Jesus did not even feel the need to defend himself. Listen, if you're following Jesus closely, it doesn't matter what anybody else says about you. You don't need to defend yourself. Now, if you're living in the world and somebody says, boom, then you immediately don't feel like, well, I gotta stand up for myself. But if you're hanging right there with Jesus and living for Him, and people start bringing accusations against you, I promise you, you're not going to feel any internal need to explain yourself or defend yourself, because you're going to be confident in who you're living for and how you're living. I've been a pastor now for closing in on 25 years, and believe it or not, some of the meanest people I've ever encountered in my life are in church. Thank God none of y'all are them. But I have had people call me everything but a child of God. Over 20 years, I've had people say stuff about me. I've had people, and you know what? I haven't ever even felt the need to defend myself. Let people say what they're going to say, because I'm living to please an audience of one, and that's Jesus Christ. And really and truly, and I don't mean this in a mean way, I don't care what anybody else has to say. Now, I want all of you to like me, and I want to be friends with you, and I want to love you, and I want you to love me, and I want us to be together and have fun and do all this stuff. But I'm not living my life to please you. And you know, when I was in a church of 1,000 people, I wasn't living my life to please any of them either. And people get upset when you won't bow down and worship them. Now people tell me, you're doing that. I said, no, I'm doing what God wants me to do. And if God tells me to zig, I'll zig. And if God tells me to dance when I hear the music, then I'll dance. But otherwise, I'm going to keep my eyes on Jesus, and I'm not bowing down to a statue, and I'm not bowing down to public opinion, and I'm surely not bowing down to you. Right? Because they didn't even feel the need to defend themselves. This is what they said. If we're thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. And that's the good news. If you're thrown into the furnace, the God who you serve is able to save you. He's able. I can't promise you He will. But I can promise you He'll be there with you if you're not bowing down to other gods. Now, you might say, well, why does He save some and not save others? I don't know. I don't know. A friend of mine, he's a Christian. I don't know how he was living out his faith, because I hadn't seen him in a long time. AJ played baseball with one of his sons in high school. 2 days ago, he's 1 or 2 years younger than me, he dropped dead. They ruled out a heart attack and a stroke. I don't know what's left after that. Aneurysm, maybe something. He's about 54 years old, building a new house up in North Hall, and he's just dead. I don't know why some people make it through cancer and some don't. I talked to a good friend of mine yesterday. His mother-in-law, a year ago, she was pronounced cancer-free from ovarian cancer. Her daughter posted on Facebook this week that the cancer is back. Would you please pray for my mother? This is a family I used to be their pastor. I talked to the lady, her name is Mary. I talked to her son-in-law, David, yesterday, and I told David, David, Tony and Mary have been friends of mine for a long, long time. I said, if there's anything I can do, if I can come pray with them, I said, I know I'm not their pastor now, but if I can come pray with them, if I can come minister to them, if there is anything I can do, all you got to do is tell me. He said, I don't know how much you know about what shape she's in. I said, I don't know a whole lot. He said, the cancer is metastasized in her liver, in her lungs, in her heart. It's everywhere. He said, the only thing they can do is there's this new clinical trial pill out that is supposed to shrink any kind of cancer. Not eliminate it, but shrink. What the pill possibly can do is extend her life. But she's going to die. She's going to die. And I don't know why. She's one of the sweetest, kindest people I've ever known. But she's going to die. But I told, Peggy reminds me of this a lot. Peggy and Martha, they have a niece that died a few years ago of cancer. And when she was dying, I told her this. And Peggy had to remind me, I told her this. But I said, listen, Gail. I said, you win either way. I said, if you're cured, you win. If you die, you win. How do you win by dying? Well, for a Christian, you get to go to heaven. You get to escape this fallen mess of a place that we live in. Because the Apostle Paul, the Bible says he was called up to the third heaven, and once he got a glimpse of it, he didn't want to come back to earth. You know? He said, I want to stay here. He said, but it's better for all of y'all. You wrote this. He said, it's better for y'all that I come back because y'all need the ministry that I'm providing. He said, but I would rather stay there, but because for me to live is Christ, but to die is gain. So even if the furnace kills you, you still win. As long as that other one is there with you in the fire. But this is what he says. I find this interesting. He said, if we're thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us, and he will rescue us from your power, your majesty. But even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue you have set up. Now that's strong right there. That's powerful. That's telling the world, I don't care what you encourage me to do. I don't care what will get me ahead in the world. I will never bow down to an idol. I will never not follow Jesus. I will never disavow the one who saved me on the cross. He will deliver me, but even if he doesn't, I still won't do what you're asking me to do. Now, if the church was full of that kind of Christians, and I'm not talking about this church, I'm not talking about the church of Jesus Christ, the whole church. If we were all living that way, says, listen, world, I don't care what you say. I am not going to back up 1 centimeter from following Jesus Christ, even if it kills me. I'm not going to change. Well, see, we'll cave in at the drop of a hat. You know, God help us be like these boys. And you know what? You know how old they were? They were in their teens. They were teenagers. So Nebuchadnezzar was so furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that his face became distorted with rage. He commanded that the furnace be heated. Now listen, he wasn't just going to throw them in the furnace, but because of what they said, Nebuchadnezzar said, he said, I want to tell you what, guys, I want you to heat the furnace up 7 times hotter than normal. 7 times hotter. And this is the reality of following Christ. If you live like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the closer you follow, the hotter it may get. But there'll be another one in the fire. There'll be another one in the fire. If you live like these 3 boys. So they heated it up 7 times hotter. Now watch this. This is really cool. Then he ordered some of the strongest men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and threw them into the blazing furnace. So they tied them up and threw them into the furnace fully dressed in their pants, turbans, robes, and other garments. And because the king in his anger had demanded such a hot fire in the furnace, the flames killed the soldiers as they threw the 3 men in. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, securely tied, fell into the roaring flames. Here's the principle. If you'll stay faithful to God, God will destroy those who are trying to destroy you. God will take care of those who are trying to take care of you. You don't know what happened yet unless you know the whole story. Probably most of you do. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego go tumbling into the fire, and the guys that threw them in there, they're dead. Because they refused to bow down to the idol. And that's the number 1 sin in Christianity today is idolatry. Not golden statues, but just other stuff that's more important than God. That's the number 1 problem in Christianity, is idolatry. It seems like to me that I remember somewhere in these things called the 10 Commandments that thou shalt not worship idols. An idol is just anything that's more important to you than God. Me, AJ, Adam, Tom, Chris, we went to the Georgia game last night. Tom and Chris never been to Sanford Stadium. Terrible night. Went raining, wind blowing, cold. I go to Georgia games regularly. That stadium holds 92,000 people. And I guarantee you there's an overwhelming preponderance of people there who would claim to be Christians who worship Georgia football more than they worship Jesus Christ. You might say, how do you know that? Here's how I know. People will show up at 7 o'clock in the morning for an 8:30 game at night and be there 11, nearly 12 hours early. Yet most folks can't get to church on time. You might say, well, now, you shouldn't make that comparison. Why not? How do you get to a ball game 12 hours ahead of time, but you can't get to church on time? Well, the reason is because the ball game is more important than Jesus Christ is. So they're in the fire, all right? And the other guys are dead. But suddenly Nebuchadnezzar jumped in amazement and exclaimed to his advisors, didn't we tie up 3 men and throw them into the furnace? Yes, your majesty, we did, they replied. Look, Nebuchadnezzar shouted, I see 4 men. 4 men walking around in the fire. That's what that whole song's about. There'll be another one in the fire. Listen, you live like the 3 teenagers, I can't guarantee you this. There'll always be another one in the fire. There'll always be another one in the fire. There'll always be. You live like the teenagers, you get cancer, there'll be another one in that fire. You live like the teenagers, doesn't matter what kind of furnace you get thrown into, there'll be another one in the fire. Who was that other one? Well, he said, I see 4 men. Not only 4 men, but guess what? What condition were they in when they got thrown in? They were tied up, right? Now they're in the furnace, and what does it say? they're loose. Not only will there be another one in the fire with you, but he'll take the chains off of you while you're in the fire. He'll set you free while you're in the furnace. You ought to write that down. If I'll just live the way God's called me to live, God will set me free while I'm in the fire. He'll set me free while I'm in the furnace. We see 4 men unbound walking around in the fire unharmed. Now, God doesn't always take us immediately out of the fire, but what He does is He keeps the fire from ultimately destroying us. Was it still hot in there? Absolutely, it was hot. Because the heat, it killed the guys who threw them in. So it was hot in the fire, but the fire didn't kill them. And that's an important principle to remember. When we get in those furnaces, it's going to be hot. And it may be painful. But with another one in the fire, it won't destroy us. It will not destroy us. We see 4 men walking around in the fire unharmed, and the 4th looks like a god. And then Nebuchadnezzar came as close as he could to the door of the flaming furnace and shouted, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants. Notice, God was small g. It looks like a god, some kind of god. I don't know who it is. Now Nebuchadnezzar has completely changed his opinion. He said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants. Look at how he changed the title. Servants of all, in caps, the Most High God. Hey, you servants of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I know when y'all came here, y'all had your God and I had my God. But now I've seen what your God can do compared to what my God can do. And I believe that I'm going to worship your God instead of my God because your God is better than my God. And the Bible tells us that he that is in us is greater than he that is in the world. If there's another one in the fire. It's a great story. So Nebuchadnezzar, he shouted this, come out and come here. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stepped out of the fire. Then the high officers, officials, governors, and advisors crowded around them and saw, this is so cool, saw that the fire had not touched them, not a hair on their heads was singed, and their clothing was not scorched. And this to me is the most ironic part of all. And they didn't even smell like smoke. We can't isolate ourselves from the world, and we shouldn't. Because the world needs salt and light. But what we can do is insulate ourselves from the world and the fiery furnaces of life and come out of those things as ultimate winners and not even smelling like smoke. Now, I'm not telling you it ain't going to be painful while you're in there. It's going to be hot. But you can come out still standing. You can come out ultimately unharmed if you just won't get distracted and bow down to idols. If you'll live as if Jesus Christ is who we say He is. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stepped out. They crowded around them. They didn't even smell the smoke. Watch what Nebuchadnezzar did. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, praise to the God. He goes from insisting that everyone worship a golden idol or elsewise you die, to now he's worshiping an unseen God of Abraham, of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He said, praise to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And he sent his angel to rescue his servants who trusted him. They defied the king's command and were willing to die rather than serve or worship any god except their own God, capital G. Therefore, I make this decree. If any people, whatever their race or nation or language, speak a word against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they will be torn limb from limb, and their houses will be burned into heaps of rubble. There is no other God who can rescue like this. There's no other God. You can try any way you can think of to get out of the fiery furnaces of life, but there is no thing, no person, no idea, no other God who can rescue like our God. Like our God. One of the oldest praise choruses I remember, our God is an awesome God. One of the first ones we sang back in the 90s, I guess. Our God is an awesome God. And watch this. If you'll just be faithful, not get distracted by idols, not bow down to idols, stand up for your God, let yourself get thrown in the furnace, let that other be with you there in the fire, you can come out in an even greater position. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were over the province of Babylon. It really doesn't seem like there's anywhere to go higher than that. Verse 30. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to even higher positions in the province of Babylon. Even higher positions. See, that's who we need to be. That's who we ought to be. That's who we all want to be. Because around every corner, there's a fiery furnace. I guarantee you, if we were all just to circle our chairs up and say, all right, we're going to quit lying to each other and we're going to be honest, some of us would admit to being into an awful furnace right now. If we would just tell each other the truth, we could probably all say that we're in some kind of furnace or I know I am. You know, last week I talked about prisons. Today I'm talking about furnaces. It seems like there's blowtorches on every side. It does. I could name you 3 or 4 things just in the last week that if there weren't another in the fire with me, it would have taken me under. For the last week, my dad's called me 2 or 3 times a day because he knows some of the stuff's going on in my life. Some of the stuff is troubling me. Some of the fire, he's called me 2 or 3 times, just asked me, are you okay? You okay? You all right? Here's what he's asking. I know you're in that furnace, and I know it's hot, but are you still alive in there? I'm thankful for that phone call. Very thankful. And I wish that I could throw some water on some of the flames. Because the main reason they're hurting me is because they're hurting people that I love. That's where the majority of my pain comes from. It's when people I love are hurting. And that's what hurts me. And this week, it's been pretty hot. I had to deal with some difficult stuff this week. 2 or 3 phone calls a day. You okay in there in the fire? I can't put it out for you, but I'm just calling to make sure you're okay. I'm thankful for that. But I am more thankful that there's another one in the fire with me. Because I'll tell you what, were it not for Jesus Christ, I would have crumbled into a heap of ashes long ago. I almost did in 2014. I almost did. The fire almost got me. But it didn't. And I'm out of that fire today, and I don't even smell like the smoke of that fire. That, I can talk about that openly because that fire is no longer burning me in my life. Because there was another one with me and ultimately got me through. Did it hurt? Yeah, it hurt. Probably as bad as anything I've ever experienced. Being depressed is worse than dying. I promise you, wanting to die is worse than dying. Feeling like you're worthless is one of the most horrible things you can ever feel. Feeling hopeless is one of the most horrible things you can ever feel. And I know, there's no doubt in my mind, were it not for Jesus, a doctor He put in my life, a support system that He surrounded me with, had there not been another in that fire, I would not be standing here today. I'd still be alive, but I would have been so wounded and so messed up and so burned up that it would have taken me out of Christian ministry. It would have. There's no doubt in my mind. If there had not been another in my fire, that I would not be here, would not be right here. I would be somewhere, but I wouldn't be here. You know what? A lot of people would look at kind of where I've gone the last couple of years and said, well, you know, you've gone from the palace to the pit. No, I haven't. I've got a promotion. Because I get to influence more people for Jesus Christ in a smaller group of believers and get to do the other things that I get to do than I did sitting in an office running a huge organization. So we got to keep moving. There's going to be fires and furnaces along the way, but there'll be another one in the fire with you. Just take your eyes off the idols, refuse to bow down, and stay faithful to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And you'll get through it. Okay?